Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Do you grab a seat if you're just coming in? And I want to remind you, you've got 2 days of exciting conversation. So if you love the person next to you, find them at the tea break. If I can draw you together just now, that'd be great. Good. Well, welcome to the Blavatnik School of Government. My name is Calum. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and Associate Dean here. And it's also my privilege to serve as a member of the Partnership Board for the Government Outcomes Lab, which, as you know, is hosting the conference over the next 2 days. I'm delighted to see so many of you here. The conference this year is twice the size that it was last year, and I think has rapidly established itself as the international forum for you, experts from academia and government, concerned with how governments around the world can effectively work with partners to deliver social outcomes. Let me just say a really brief word about the school, for those of you who are visiting us for the first time. The Blavatnik School exists to improve government. As a department at one of the world's leading universities, we look to work with governments at all levels and in all sectors to understand their most pressing challenges. We then generate excellent research and evidence which we seek to share with public servants through education, communication, and by convening groups like this to inform their choices in policy development and implementation. So in that context, the conference and the wider work of the Go Lab is a great example of the work of the school. It's applied, working closely with many of you as practitioners, generating practical learning. It's multidisciplinary. We work across sectors and academic boundaries. It's independent, we apply rigorous research, and it's global. We draw on evidence from many countries. One of the other privileges of occupying this building is the chance to convene people and hopefully provide a great environment for discussions, debate, and interactions, and I hope you'll enjoy that over the next 2 days. 4 years ago, I was part of the team here at the school which began conversations with the UK government about how a programme of research and engagement with practitioners could help our understanding of social impact bonds, and more generally, how to improve commissioning for social outcomes. We've come a long way since then, and I want to thank our partners in the Inclusive Economy Unit at DCMS for their continuing support. Through initiatives like the Life Chances Fund, which supports outcomes-oriented funding models at scale, the UK continues to be a leading innovator in this area, as many of you know. The Go Lab benefits from the chance to work with practitioners and policymakers in the UK and draw on their experience. But we also seek to relate that to initiatives in other countries and globally. Today, the Go Lab is established as a hub for research into the commissioning of social outcomes. We're delighted to be a trusted partner for those in government, the private and voluntary sectors, and in academia. We intend to continue our work as a convening hub for dialogue with and between partners. We're very proud of the fact that the Go Lab has increased significantly in resources and outputs over the last 4 years. Our core team, many of you will know members of it, has grown from 2 to 14. We're supported by a wonderful network of 20 fellows of practice. Alongside our key reports, and a couple of which we'll be discussing today, over the next 2 days, we've also published a number of well-received practitioner guides. We've hosted 24 events and webinars, have over 900 subscribers to our monthly newsletter, and have seen over 26,000 visitors to our website in the last year. So the Go Lab has grown, but as you know better than me, so has the sector. And the scale of this conference shows that. At the same time, political events around the world, not least here in the UK, have been a sharp reminder in many countries of the dissatisfaction of many citizens with social outcomes. So our task is just as urgent today as it was when the Go Lab was founded 4 years ago. Our conference agenda is rich and fascinating, and I don't attempt to summarise the feast of ideas that you will enjoy over the next 2 days. Instead, I just want to highlight 3 themes which strike me as priorities and which may underpin some of your conversations. Firstly, accountability and the role of actors. In our debates, we're typically looking at models where governments seek partners from the not-for-profit private sectors, or where partners approach government about initiatives to tackle challenges to help in the achievement of social outcomes. But I think the question that persists is, are we always clear on the distinct responsibilities of different actors within these partnerships and on how we recognise interdependence on the one hand while maintaining effective accountability? I think a second big question is the scope of our work. How can we learn from a wider set of experimentation across the public sector in using partnerships to deliver social outcomes? Many of our conversations start with social impact bonds, but which other models should we be learning from? not least to make sure we're not repeating the mistakes of the past. And lastly, I hope we'll have time to focus on the importance of knowledge sharing as a public good. Innovation can be accelerated by ready access to transparent open data, but some information is considered private and less readily shared. What are the constraints and how might we address them? Thank you all for being with us. I wish you a fruitful, stimulating and above all useful 2 days that will deepen your personal ability to have an impact on the pressing challenges that have framed the conference agenda. Thank you.
So I want to welcome you on behalf of the Go Lab. And I want to spend the first two minutes to explain why the Go Lab is here. And I will do that asking you first to think about what is your purpose. I was thinking, what gets me to the office on good days? And then I thought, no, actually, my purpose is what gets me to the office on bad days. So I would like you to think about what gets you to your office doing your job on bad days when you don't want to get out. And this is really important. Take 1 minute to think about why you do it. Looks like many people know already. This is good. So what gets me to the office on bad days is that I think we want to make a difference to the life of people. And the discussion over these 2 days will be a lot about having the investor, having partnership and government and donors. Those are very high-level macro things. But helping those people creating a good contract doesn't get me out of the office, out of the house to go to the office. It gets me out of the office. What gets me out of my house is to think that if I'm creating the evidence to help those people create the right ecosystem, the right organizational design, that will have a big impact on the life of girls, of boys, of men and women. If I don't see the link between the organizational design and what difference does it make to a person, that doesn't motivate me. So what my team works on is this governance arrangement. How do you get people working well together? What's the role of government? We are at the School of Government to create the right ecosystem for different players to play the right role and deliver the outcomes we want for our society. What are these outcomes? We decide them democratically if we're lucky to live in a democratic country, or we need to find a way to see what is it people want. And the work that we do, it might seem technical over these 2 days. I want you to think about what happens at the end of this chain of events. And at the Go Lab, we really care about what happens at the end. So let's not get lost on the details of, is this outsourcing, is it insourcing? What matters is will this lead to better outcomes for those people? So this is the spirit of the team, and I hope this will inform the conversation over these days. Calum already mentioned the main themes in the conference in terms of having knowledge as a public good, in terms of accountability and learning. So we are looking at impact bond, outcome-based contract, but at the end of the day, we want to see what travels, what are the active ingredients of this mechanism that will lead to better outcomes. So this is not a conference to advocate for impact bonds or against impact bonds or other instruments. It's a conference where we want to learn from academic and practitioners what is helpful to achieve the outcomes that we want to achieve and why, what are the preconditions for this mechanism to activate. I want to highlight that the conference is really packed because we received an incredibly high number of abstracts. We had a very high bar to accept people, and we rejected many people, and even so, we had too many abstracts going around, so we decided we think those topics are really, really important, and it was going to be a very fast-paced conference. So I asked everybody, keep to time, because there are lots of ideas going around. Both the plenary session and the parallel session have very high caliber speakers. We will have a screen in the atrium to make sure that even if you decide that you need to have the very important conversation, you can stay connected with what's happening in this room. For those who are new, I want to highlight that the conference is really a mix between academic and practitioners, which is what is unique about this conference. And so be patient with the academic who might speak gibberish, and be patient with the practitioner who don't know that we've thought about it for 30 years and there is a massive literature about the topic. Let's talk to each other and learn from each other. So some housekeeping bits. There is no fire alarm today, and so if you hear a scary sound and there's a please leave that building, we have 2 exits, one on your left, one on your right. And toilets are across the hall. If you go toward the, it's just the other side, right? This side. And the sessions will be the parallel session in the seminar room, which are on this floor, and on the first floor for seminar room 9. The team of the Go Lab is here to help. It's a big team. Can I ask the team to stand up? So identify 2 of them, and they don't have a yellow T-shirt. So you have their picture on the delegate pack, so you can look them up. I want to remind you that there will be pictures taken, and the plenary session are going to be filmed. If for any reason you're uncomfortable with that, let Grace know, and she will try to Photoshop you out. I hope you're connected to Wi-Fi. Are you all connected? Okay, I have IT people in the room, and to test that you are connected, I am inviting you to go on Slido. This is the website I want you to go to. And you will be asked to enter an access, and that's SOC, Social Outcome Conference 19. And there you will see 4 questions, which I would like you to answer. If you have a problem with the IT, raise your hand, because we have the IT team on duty. You can't connect? Can't connect? Really? Well, Matt is the head of IT. So if it's not working, he will fix it. Matt, somebody here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Matt, you need to call all the team down. So the first question, for those who are connecting, the first question is, where have you traveled from the conference? So have a sense of who is here. And on screen, we are seeing who's around today. Did you manage? All of them? That's Sweden and Switzerland.
Hands up, is anyone else?
Here, there.
Okay.
As people are getting on Slido, can I remind you, throughout the 2 days, you can post your questions on Slido, and you can vote other people's questions up and down the priority, and we try to address those questions during our discussion and the plenaries. And this question will also be posted in the forum. If you want to see what other people have said, you go in the forum, you can find them. And the dash SOC 19 is also the handle for Twitter. So please tweet away to involve people who are not able to be here in person, have a sense about the debate and what's being discussed. I can check with Matt. Is there a common problem that we can publicly say, like, if you want to connect, this is what you need to do?
If you want to connect, you just need to connect to the Social Outcomes Conference Wi-Fi. You should have received an email and password by, a username and password by email.
Okay, so in your email, there is a username and password. The network is a Social Outcome Conference. And Matt has your credentials on a printed version. So
here's the challenge. If you can't get into your email, you can't see it.
yeah.
Is it common to all the users?
No.
They're all different. So I think while you log on, let's see at our preliminary result. This is where you're coming from. Many people from London and Oxford. Convenient. We have you from Australia. We have people from as far as Canada, South Africa, many Europeans, and a number of live stream. This is where they're traveling from. Nice. The next question we had is on the sector you're working in. So as I said, there is a mix of academia and research, many people from the voluntary and nonprofit sector, public sector. So it's really a mix. So this is a richness, but we need to cross boundaries, and all the conference is about is how we work well together across different sectors. You are put to the test during the conference. We have the next question for those in control. This is a number of burning issues. As I said, those burning issues will be posted outside. And then there was a question about if you could pick your 3 top priorities on improving outcomes, what would they be? And at the moment, the top one is that all stakeholders are transparent about the success and failures of a project. Routine evaluation and involvement of citizens in the design and delivery of the service. So as you get online, contribute to this. We will circulate the results. I suggest we move on because I said I'm keeping people to time. I need to keep myself to time. I'm not going through what the conference is going to cover. It's in your pack. As I said, the meetings are on this floor or on the first floor. If you have a chance, go on the 4th floor. There is a lovely terrace where you can see Oxford. I just want to take 1 minute to draw your attention on the new website that we basically just launched. And when we started the Go Lab, we focused on the UK market, but our ambition has always been to be global and international. And over the past 6 months, we work with a number of partners to try and understand what are the needs of this community, especially from the practitioner's aspect, to learn from other people's experience and build on best practice and avoid doing mistakes that other people have been doing. We consulted with many of you. What would you like to see online? And we launched the first version of this website. I'm not a perfectionist, so I don't launch something until it's ready. I launch it when it's good enough. And we feel this is good enough, but it's out there for you to look and tell us how to make it better. So it's something for you to react to. It has to be helpful to you. The main audience of this website is not academics. The main audience of this website is practitioners, and we want to bring this independent lens as an academic institution to what is the evidence, what is emerging from practice, and put it out there. One thing that you said during the consultation is that downloading a document gets you so far, tends to be boring. The way you want to learn is by speaking to each other. And so we created a community function that you see on this website, where we are inviting organizations to post what they've been doing, what is their area of expertise, which region of the world they're operating in, which policy area, and the contact name. So that if you are working in a particular policy area in a country, you can do a little search and pick up the phone and ask, who is operating in this area? How did you overcome this legal challenge? And you can speak to each other. And we will organize webinars for the community. And we hope this website is really a two-way conversation between the reflective side of academia and the dynamism of a vibrant community of practitioners. So if it becomes a repository, we have failed. So it has to be really exciting, and that depends on all of you. So if your organization is not up there yet and you're keen to be there, you can go online and do it, or in the forum today there will be iPads where you can be listed, and so your name and your experience will appear there. I'll stop here because I want to introduce our keynote speaker. It's my great pleasure to have Stefan Dercon to open this conference with this keynote. Stefan is a professor of public policy here at the Blavatnik School of Government and the Department of Economics in Oxford. He has been the chief economist of DFID in the UK for over 6 years. He has been teaching in Ethiopia, in Belgium, in Helsinki, and then we are lucky enough to have him here. I asked him to reflect back, given his great experience of working in development economics. What is it that is different with this impact bond? Is it a fad? Is there something that will remain? Will they make a difference? How does it fit with the existing thinking on how can we improve practice on the ground? So I will not take any more seconds from you. Thank you, Stefan.
Okay, well, let me see, yes. Well, it's a great pleasure to be able to talk here. I'm going to talk about, well, what we seem to be here gathered for to think about, how to, making sure that when we do delivery, we are really trying to reach the best possible outcome. Sorry, phone away, otherwise it's going to interfere. Yes. I will say a little bit more specifically what to do, but allow me just to start with, a little story. I don't know whether anyone recognizes this man. Anyone, any idea who this is? I heard it, I think. Edison, yes, exactly. This is Thomas Alva Edison. He was quite an interesting man. In all kinds of ways. He was rather peculiar as well. Okay, so if you were to apply for a job for him, as the famous inventor, including of this thing, if you want to apply and work for him, he put you through a whole battery of tests. So he would ask, things like, what is the Bessemer process, what is brass? I could not be surprised. He was an engineer and he was interested in that kind of stuff. But he would happily ask an engineer, who is Leonidas? And the answer is not a Belgian chocolate, but it's actually, of course, a king warrior prince, a king warrior from Sparta. He would ask a mason or a carpenter that would work with him, who was the emperor at the time of the birth of Jesus Christ. And he would do things like that. So he was, interesting. You don't want to go through his interview process properly. But actually, probably most peculiar or most striking was how he would interview researchers, young researchers, research assistants to apply. And the way he would do it, it had something to do with salt and pepper. He had a very simple way of doing it. He would ask them also the battery of tests, but then he would invite them to lunch or to dinner. And he would put a bowl of soup in front of them, and he would watch them. And if they reached to the salt and pepper and put it in before they tasted it, he said, interview over, you're out. This is not the scientific method. You need to taste first before you do anything like this. Just think of yourself, whether you're a scientist or not now, next time you are having lunch or dinner somewhere. But it's very striking, and he was the true embodiment in practice of the underlying idea of the scientific method. And so this is, in a way, what I want to talk a bit about it. The scientific method in delivery in the public sector, in theory and in practice. Okay, because if we think about it, well, what would it mean? How can we use the best insights, the best science to deliver optimally? And where optimally means, can we get the best possible outcome or results given the resources we have? Now, it's a very standard way, probably as an economist, as myself, would look at it, but also when you're sitting in a public sector organization as a commissioner, it's arguably one of the questions you're really asking yourself. How do I get most out of this? How do I get the best possible outcome? And indeed, I think you all represent the ideas of the scientific method in delivery. This is, in a way, what a lot of you in many ways are doing. You're looking at it, you're thinking about it, critiquing it, you're doing it in practice, you're trying to do this. So, and this is where I'm going to get in trouble. Because I'm going to want to talk a little bit about this scientific method, this kind of the methods implied, and what we are doing and how we are dealing, what are the kind of basis assumptions we have, but also in theory and in practice, what does it mean, and is actually, when we are working with public sector, in my case, when I was working with ministers, do they actually think, is that the same objectives they have, why we're doing some of these things, and how are we actually operating? So, and I'm going to look at outcome-based contracting and social impact bonds. That's where I'm going to get in trouble, because you are the experts. I, at best, sat on the other side. Okay, I've written a little bit about it, but I was missed when I was working in government, sitting on the other side. I kept on being asked by my ministers, is this the best value for money? Is this what we should be doing? And as the supposed, thank you, as the supposed guardian of value for money in the department, I had to kind of keep on answering, but should we really go for the social impact bond or this outcome-based contracting? Why are we doing this? Explain to me what others. And I want to talk a little bit about it more from that side, a little bit, at first, a bit abstract and further. But then I'm also going to talk about a very different way that is definitely in Whitehall, and I will explain a bit more in other circles, that is very important as well, a focus on, let's only spend our money on what works. Basically, find a way that you apply this as well. And it's actually another way, a very different way of thinking about, let's focus on outcomes and make sure that we only spend our money on those things that we know that actually has proven evidence that it will work. Okay? Now, it's very interesting, and that's what I want to reflect about, is that these two kind of things, when I was sitting working in government, these two things were operating in parallel. They have fundamentally different assumptions about what we know and what the problem is. And they were all behaved, and it was all this hodgepodge at ministerial meetings all coming together as if it all was just, well, it's all a bit of the same. No, fundamentally, they're very different. But what it tells us about, some of the quests we have, and I want to actually reflect a little bit. So where does it lead us? If we want to be really focused on outcomes, what other things maybe we should start considering and compare and actually judge relative to each other before we embark on something because it's cool. Okay? And so that's a bit what I want to talk. I'm going to get in trouble, I told you. But I will briefly, of course. This is a picture I took simply from a cabinet office website. This is what I will understand about outcome-based contracting. So I know there's some variations here in it, but somehow or another, we are interested in delivering, working with service provider and getting something on a population, and the payment is based on the measured outcomes, and the outcome is indeed improving for populations and society, and we try to get contracts that actually do this. If we then do social impact bonds, it just get that little extra layer in it of actually who puts up the capital to actually do this, and so on. In this respect. You know better than I do, and it can be more complicated and whatever. However, I just want to for a moment and for a second reflect on what we assume, and this is what I later want to contrast with other approaches that we use in the public sector, what we assume and in this respect. And of course, I will use the examples of my experiences in practice with my ministers. So I dealt with 4 Secretary of States at the time. 2 were absolutely committed and brilliant. 1 was an absolute disaster. And another one was, probably as interesting and as knowledgeable as with a brain of a pea. Anyway, the last one we don't hear about anymore. The other one is, one of the others is Home Secretary now, and 2 others are amongst the 21 being kicked out of the party. Of course, the brilliant ones have gone. But anyway, the joys of not being a civil servant anymore. But there's certain assumptions here in it. Because actually, I will say that none of the 4 of them really fully understood what, for example, social impact bonds were. And they didn't really do it. And I want to actually just highlight what I understood after a bit, why they were so keen on it. Okay? And that's actually quite important, because it actually must give us food for thought why we're actually doing certain other things, not least in the development space as well. So clearly, there's some assumptions on public sector efficiency. You wouldn't go for something taking out of the public sector and actually getting service providers that are parallel unless you assume that somehow the public sector couldn't do it on its own. Or you say there's certain externalities, big society ideas, that surely it must be good for society, that it thinks that it's looking after itself, or something like that. Feels a long time ago, isn't it? But we have these things. There's something also about trust or the agency of actors. Now, in the development sector, that was very important. If you think in the development sector, most of the implementers on the ground used to be charities, NGOs, church-based organizations, and so on. And actually, so no. I don't think that if I just give you a check and I want you to do the best you can for social outcomes, then that's going to be the solution. I need to have something else. Somehow or another, I can do better than just giving you a nice check to do this. So you kind of assume something about the agency of the actors. You do that. There's no other point why you would not simply, as a DFID, write a check for Save the Children and say, please try to improve the lot of children in the world as good as you can. I don't see much reason otherwise to do it. You also think that your contracting approach can solve one of the potential things that you may have then, and I definitely see it from the public sector. I know there's a lot of attention for others to say, look, it unleashes autonomy and ability to do, but of course a check would also unleash autonomy and the ability to do the best you can, if you believe that they have a problem. So you do believe there's some form of principal-agent problem. I'm the principal, I have certain objectives. There's an agent that needs to do certain things, and I somehow or another need to use a contracting approach to actually get the best out of them. You have it there. There's also something really interesting, not least when you come to, when you come to social impact bonds, about the relative risk preferences of you as a commissioner relative to what's happening in the rest of some of the possible investors. You somehow think someone else is really happy to take on the risk, and I'll come to that in a moment. But I will emphasize, it's the one thing our ministers never understood, that if we want to pass on the risk to a provider or to an investor, that costs money. That costs money. And I was trying to explain to them, actually, by the way, this is going to be, if you ask for me, on average, this is going to cost you more. On average, going to cost you more. Because you're going to actually, rather than, in the public sector in the UK, a public sector that doesn't buy fundamentally insurance, because it is the biggest risk pool in the country, it actually says, no, but for this, I'm going to get someone else to bear the risk and I'm going to be willing to pay for them. So we had endless conversations at the end, not least when outcome contracts, for example, in the case of Rwanda and Tanzania came up, where we had to say, no, we're paying more than we thought it would cost on average in the end, because they were bloody good at delivering and we now need to pay for it. But they took the risk. They knew they could take it. They were willing to take it. You're doing it. No, we can't do this. Value for money must say we can't pay more than actually the marginal cost or the average cost. So please don't pay them. Interesting situation in a ministerial meeting. Okay, good. But it's an important point we shouldn't forget. You do assume implicitly certain things that you just, and I'm not saying this is wrong, but it's somehow that you do. Of course, you also assume, which we know, and I know a lot of you have worked on it, and I often couldn't get my head around it, is that we also assume that we can contract. The catch-22 aspect is a bit there sometimes, because you only really know most of the information to be able to do the contract after you've actually already had to do the contract. And so how do you price this bloody thing is definitely something. There were cases and cases and cases where poor advisors would come to me, economists, and say, but how will I now price this? And say, well, I don't know. We don't really have the information. We want to do this kind of contract because actually we have no clue how to get this delivered. Someone else maybe will want to do it, but we need to put a price on it. And where do you get the information? So I know you all have much better ways of doing it, but I do know that several initiatives died an early death because just we had no clue. And advisors involved were not creative enough to actually start thinking about it, terrified of the bollocking that they knew already someone had for actually having paid too much for the contract. By the minister. So you get these kind of things. So this is in practice and already a little bit there. Once we were in department, look, we can't deny, and I'm just talking DFID now, I can't say off the record because I don't seem to be doing this, it seems to be streamed, but I think I definitely had the impression. A lot was based on an assumption that surely it must look good that we are not delivering ourselves. And that somehow we are modern by actually being able to do this with delivery agents and doing clever things. We also know that even in the department, and I was definitely one of the big things, is we couldn't afford to deliver ourselves. Okay, so this is, for those people who know the UK system, everybody hated us because we had 0.7 and we had a big budget, and our budget kept on rising. We couldn't afford to deliver ourselves. And the reason why we couldn't afford is that our friends in the Treasury had, and in number 10, had decided that we couldn't really have staff. We had staff with the rest of Whitehall going down, with our budget going on. So clearly it meant we couldn't prove that we could deliver better. And indeed, we had to go to approaches like this. Okay? So there was a political administrative reason why we ended up going for that. And that's fine. We respond to incentives as civil servants. We do it, and we try to do it carefully. But it's actually quite an interesting thing. And that's then just anecdotal, that one of these ministers that we really liked was actually really pushing for a massive increase in staffing and said, look, surely with a rising budget. And if you want to keep that efficiency, even if we're going to do a lot of outsourcing one way or another, surely you need people to do this well. And that's another thing I'm sure you're discovering. It doesn't necessarily save on people to do these things well, it's not least highly technical people, to do these kind of approaches well. And of course, the interesting thing is, social impact bonds really felt totally absurd for us, because we had no capital constraints. Why would we do it if we have actually a big budget? And in fact, it's a pain in those working in a civil service or in a government setting with annual budgets. These things are a really bloody pain because you don't know how much you need at to pay out, because that's the way the contract is done. You actually pay out what you need to do. So it's a sliding contradiction. So you end up constructing, and we had cases in our department, constructing things so that we could get certainty of payout, but seemingly outcome-based contracts. Think of how you solve that one. There are ways, but it doesn't look good. But the really, and I think that's the important thing that I definitely have learned, is that we did these things, and I'll come back to this. If I had learned one thing about risk in the public sector, is that fundamentally, not least in an international department, and I'm sure this could be wrongly construed on Twitter, but it's not meant to be like that. Actually, just the financial risk is really not the most important. It's sometimes really hard to know whether things are spent well and so on. There are no obvious, the big problem in a department of risk is not trying to measure, manage financial risk. This is an uncertain world, the complex things happen, stuff fails and succeeds. We may not be able to announce it that it fails, but that's by the nature of, for example, international development. But it comes to it. The most important thing is reputational risk. And why our ministers were keen on this is because it gave certainty that actually the only money we had spent was actually gone onto outcomes. You only paid for measured outcomes. It's the reputational risk that gave us actually why they were quite attracted by it. This is an incredibly nice way of managing their reputational risk, because they can really say, no, we only paid for buying these outcomes, and all the other stuff is there. It's not so important. So that was quite an interesting thing. Reputational risk is the main risk that I think a government department feels, and as a civil servant, we're responsible to try to keep the minister out of trouble. And being out of trouble means not getting their reputation tarnished. And that's the kind of main thing. It's an interesting tool for that. It's the political economy of it becomes quite interesting then as a result. I already mentioned problems with measuring and pricing, but it had definitely one other consequence. It fundamentally started changing our relationship with delivery agents. Where it used to be, we are all in it together trying to solve world poverty, it's actually you're creating a situation now, no, you're my provider and I'm the principal and I tell you what to do. And if one thing that this kind of instruments and other things have started to change is actually changing the relationship, whether it's even with other partner governments, NGOs, and whatever, delivery agents. I'm not saying it's bad, because, I've seen incredible inefficiency in some of these providers. There is a lot of holier than thou in that sector as well, where actually, we shouldn't be scrutinized in terms of whether we spend the money well, because, we have a bigger purpose. Look, anyone who's done a little bit of more philosophy is it's not good intentions, it's not just the only judge for behavior. It's consequentialism. It's like, what are the consequences of their behaviors? So it doesn't mean it, but it definitely changed the nature of the relationship that we get. Okay? And then, we had maybe a naive belief that a contract could actually solve an awful lot of the problems. I know some of you are working on, for example, how delivery agents' motivation and intrinsic actions may well be changing. I think that's a really important thing that you actually start thinking about it, and indeed worth research. Anyway, I give this as a context. This is not trying to say this is bad, but within the kind of context of an both international development and a department doing this, we shouldn't underestimate some of these kind of things. Again, I'm not going to say, therefore, these are bad instruments, but there is definitely a lot of work to be done to making sure that everybody's really clear about why we're doing it, what we can do with it, and what we can't do with it. Let me use, before I talk a bit more in conclusions about that, mention a little bit here on a very different approach that also is very powerful, and definitely, I ended up sitting on steering groups in Whitehall around that, is the whole idea around what works. Okay? That's interesting because the contrast couldn't be more striking as a very different way of doing it. And maybe the way to actually do it is to first actually say, well, both social impact bonds and outcome-based contracting, but indeed even some kind of approaches where, where we only spend money on what works, and that's actually a strong focus, get to know what works and then spend money on it. It contrasts nicely with probably, any one of you who's worked in the public sector will have probably recognized this as a standard process that we have, which is, I call this the compelling case. This was a word that I learned my first day as a civil servant, and I had no clue what they were talking about. So it took me a long time to understand what we mean by making a compelling case. So making a compelling case is as follows. You have an idea, the minister has an idea that seems appealing. Find the evidence to support it, preferably in academic literature, and make a lot of footnotes in the submission, in the notes. Or, as it is classically was a case of the Prime Minister speaking at Unga, and I usually had no dealings with it, but coincidentally, this is on the time of the General Assembly, we were in New York for another launching an event. Prime Minister decides that he's going to make a statement. Corruption is the most important factor hindering growth in poor developing countries. And I got a message from the speechwriter, please give an academic source for this. And that is definitely sums up probably a lot of my role as a chief economist. Construct a compelling case, and then basically, as long as it's announced, it's fine. Announce is announceables are deliverables. That's the only thing. As long as we have it announced, it's happened. And we know that. Why we're doing a lot, and why actually many of you sitting here, is a deep frustration, is that just announcing a budget doesn't mean any outcome is being generated, okay? So this is just as a kind of contrast and equate that with success, okay? Of course, this is not evidence-based policymaking as we know it. It's at best policy-based evidence-making, as we are very unfortunately familiar with, okay? And I definitely felt it. I know at some point one of the ministers I really liked, she asked me at some point, shouldn't we do this? Do we have any evidence for this? And I said, Secretary of State, look, any idea you have, if you really want me to, anything you ever dream up, I can find you a peer-reviewed article that probably claims this is a good thing. But please don't ask me, because that's not the way we work with research. We don't pick and choose whenever it suits for our arguments. Footnotes in official documents we always know why they are put there. Single article citations in any public sector document, please don't trust. That's not a way to use evidence, okay? But they're full of them. Actually, we're talking about something else here. We want to do it slightly differently, and if you think this may be a standard program cycle, there's some planning process going on, there's an implementation phase, and maybe an evaluation phase, and we keep on doing it. Okay, and so most project cycles are a bit like this. Now, ideally, if you say you want to do everything evidence-based, well, you want to do planning based on the best evidence. You want to actually say, look, what is the collective body of knowledge telling me about this? And that's actually you want to do the planning. Then you do some implementation, carefully keeping an eye on what's going on, and then hopefully you do some very careful evaluation, maybe a randomized controlled trial, or some careful counterfactual analysis, and it feedbacks in the whole thing. That would be great. As we know, this is extremely hard. And if you think of it, what you do with outcome-based contracting and so on is that saying, look, this has so many flaws, I can't really do this one well. Let's actually make sure someone does it, but arrange it somehow that the incentives are aligned, that we get the best out of this part, and then we don't really have to bother too much with some of the others. I put it very bluntly, but you don't have to bother them too much with evaluation and so on, because, no. The incentives are set, and you use the contracting as a way of overcoming it. In a kind of what works approach, that's basically saying, let's do very intensive trials, Department of Work and Pensions, do a series of labour market intervention, as they did, I remember, towards the end of the Labour years. One option, that politically another party was more in favour of than the one that they did, and let's work it out. Of course, it's a tricky one. That was a particular case. The results only came out after the elections already changed the government, and actually the conclusion was, if I recall well, that the thing that then the government by then had implemented was proven to be the worst, so it's not really very helpful at that stage. This paper is on the website of the Department of Works and Pension, but not many people know where it is, really. But anyway, but you do it, you test very carefully what works. And one of the things is, and this is what I find very striking, and I've seen it in my department as well, let's only spend the money on what works, basically says that solves all our problems. We actually don't have to worry too much about this anymore, because we only spend our money because the things that we know that works. Look, and there are groups that I've seen, and okay, they're great in many other ways, but I've heard them saying this a bit too often. And the lead, David Halpern and so on, only spending on what works, that's our way of securing value for money in government. Behavioral Insights team often has done that, with little tweaks and so on, testing it. And then they get scaled, and we never hear about them again. Those living in the UK with a smart meter for energy in their house will start wondering, because actually there is an RCT there early on for getting that evidence, these incredible claims that we now gradually hear in the public space being scaled down of what the big impact isn't going to be, and actually become slowly mine is in my cupboard because my provider is not supporting it anymore. But anyway, it was a bit of a what works kind of idea. Or if we get everybody with a smart meter, sorry for those who don't need it, somehow that you know what energy you're consuming and you see daily the pounds ticking over, and it actually showed in an RCT that actually it makes you more conscious about your energy use and brings down energy use. But, an RCT did that. In development economics, it's really powerful. Looking at the cockpit, development economics, it's really powerful. It's a huge amount of research money goes in there, with the promise that we will tell you now, based on these RCTs, what works. Now, I'm an affiliate of JPAL. I do some of these things. At the same time, and as you will notice in a moment, worried about a lot of the implementation knowledge. But an interesting book, with the best, this is as a research tool, great, doing it. Some of you may know Björn Lomborg, the skeptical environmentalist, who keeps on running this Copenhagen consensus and makes these long lists of, this is the things with the highest benefit over cost ratios relative to the others based on RCTs, and basically that's the only thing we should spend on. And so, one of the ministers, one of the not so good ones, left the idea in it and brought him in, and I was instructed, work with Björn to get a list of all the things we should be doing in descending order, and we should spend all our money on it. So, okay, good. As you notice, it never happened, so at least I learned some civil service tricks as well. The assumptions that we have here, I want to just emphasize, these things coexist at the same time. They're all focused on, let's make sure we get better outcomes and better value for money, for better use of the money for it. It's actually a fundamentally other one. They are totally agnostic on efficiency. They say there's no problem with implementation. As long as we spend the money and write a check for the things we know that works, it's fine. As long as we announce that we're going to spend on that thing, it's fine. It's very striking that in the same big institution, these approaches are standing there in parallel, often used at the same time. Actually, it's a fundamentally different approach. There is no problem of delivery. There is no implementation challenge. There is no agency problem. There is no scale problem. Actually, and that's the academic thing, we just assume from a moment that if we tried it on 100 people, it will work on 1 million. So the external versus internal validity. Now, RCTs, as a research tool, are incredibly strong, what we call internal validity. It basically is very clear on what the cause and effect is within the sample you're doing it. But of course, you assume that that population and that implementation both will are exactly the same at scale. And as we know for here about a lot of practitioners, implementation is often not so self-evident. But actually it just assumes goes away. And then as a result, it also means, we haven't solved any of these problems of contracting. We haven't solved any of these implementation problems, but we behave as if we have. So also in practice, we tend to have much more information on benefits. We never have them on cost, and it has to do with that scale problem. You know, delivery, we don't usually know, and economists understand what I'm saying, whether there's increasing or decreasing returns to scale, whether actually at scale it's actually gradually more and more expensive to deliver, or whether actually it becomes cheaper and cheaper to deliver. And that's not so self-evident, because the world is complex and has interrelationships, and at a small scale you could do something, but at big scale there's unexpected consequences enough to do it. And then basically, you know, you have evidence that is often on very small, very defined type of things, but on longer term it is not there. Interesting though, the practice in the ministerial room was very striking. You know, in practice, these were the things what we have with the assumptions, that we have. The most striking one, ministers loved it, because it seemed to be able them to again manage reputational risk totally. We tell them, no, as long as you spend on this, we give them full certainty that actually this will work at scale. We basically say that we have very strong evidence. Look, there's an RCT that showed that these kind of returns, and we just multiply something on 100, we multiply by 10,000 to get something on 1 million, and say on 1 million people this will save so much money, or this will save so many lives. Or indeed, you know, so many lives were saved last year by DFID. Statements we will have heard are based essentially on these kind of things. So basically, again, that you have. So you create ex-ante certainty ex-ante. Since a minister is only interested in announcing a policy, not really implementing it, it works beautiful. There's nobody that would ever know it. And then we are back to other problems. Now, this is quite interesting because there's two contrasting ways that we get. Both approaches come from a commitment to trying to improve outcomes, but they have very different assumptions, and we are not necessarily getting there. So, I know I will have to wrap up. Just some lessons here, you know. Both of these are valiant and proper attempts to try to bring the scientific method into public policy. You know, one very much focused on the delivery side and the way of getting there, it's sort of the other one very much on the pure evidence side, ex ante, and to doing it. Very different assumptions. One is very much focused on the fact that delivery is really where the problem is. To be honest, I'm with you. Delivery is a real problem. It's also a bit like maybe at times to say because it's for innovation and so on, because nobody really knows what works or how to do anything. The what works approach seems to be totally different. Oh, we can discover what works. We can tell you exactly how to do it. And I'm going to go to you as a provider, you just do what I said here. Think of it as a bit like, I make you the recipe. You're going to cook it, the school dinners for the whole thing. Or indeed, tell a provider, save the children. Oh, I know that this combination of little interventions shows, we will give you money to do this little package of interventions, and that you'll do. So, you know, there is, again, there's a total ignoring of the implementations challenge and basically a total belief that it's there. Politicians love these two approaches because it brings certainty in slightly subtle ways. But it allows us to say, look, this is scientifically based. We really understand what's going on here. And we just need to understand that that's somehow, they jumped on it. And definitely all ministers seem to have been jumping on these approaches because it gave what they were worried about most, a lot of protection. Now, can I be a bit more positive? Of course. These things are actually, you know, and one my appeal is here always understand what drives why certain things are being encouraged and not. And as a civil servant, I think it was always good advice to just really thinking, why does the minister like this? And what is it doing, then how we need to work on it. It doesn't mean that we can't exploit that, because there are some good things in both of these ways of doing it. But we have to do it with our eyes open. And these approaches are two ways in which we're trying to make sure outcomes are being achieved properly. I also think that both of them are often quite important niches. I think somehow, given some of the problem with social impact bonds, this is never going to be the majority of our public service delivery, whether it's as a DFID or indeed as any government department. But it can do a useful role in a very clear set of cases where actually let's put it like this, the incentives are aligned between the politicians and those who really care about the outcomes, including some politicians. At the same time, the same with what works. It can be applicable to certain things. But the majority sits with project cycles that actually can't quite do this. And where we best come back to where we want to avoid that we just do it with a compelling case, where we actually have to actually do a lot of the planning with the best possible evidence. Some people say as long as we then evaluate, we will error correct the whole system. A lot of researchers actually from my kind of research would say, oh, no, that's the way we'll do it. That's how we'll influence policy. We just do an evaluation and we'll tell them whether this worked or not. And then it's going to be very hard for you to do it again. I can assure you one thing. If there's one thing that evidence can do with ministers, it can scare the hell out of them. There's no minister in DFID that will ever implement something where it's clearly shown in the research that this really doesn't work. Negative role of evidence is there. But I think it rarely, and that's again come to these things, the evidence is usually not that clear-cut whether it really works. It's not always clear. We don't know whether it works at scale and whatever it is. So just doing this is not necessarily getting us. And that comes to my very final point. And it's this red thing. We have to start thinking more about implementation. But not thinking that we can contract all the problems away, as we seem to be tending to do with social impact bonds and similar approaches. But actually saying, no, let's make sure, if we do delivery for good social outcomes, to think very carefully about it. So this approach, as the first bullet point there, the approach of saying we can just wait until the end and then we'll learn and that will be it, it just doesn't work. A classic case was, in DFID, a very big community-based kind of social fund. So basically communities in the Congo and DRC were actually given a big amount of money, and the idea was, the theory of change was, the idea was that the program incentivized people to work cross-community. You know, this is Eastern DRC, a lot of ethnic violence, lots of murders and violence and all kinds of stuff were happening. Very low trust within the community. We set up a system that research, often qualitative research, had suggested this actually sounds like a really good idea, to actually make them work together and come together and undo certain things. Actually, beneficiary loved it. We had beneficiary feedback, monitoring, and people told us, actually, we really love the project. Then the RCT from Columbia came, where we had to announce, look, we will know in due course whether this works, and then we will scale up the whole thing. The RCT from Columbia University was in place, all going to happen. Suddenly, we reached the project cycle, this moment that a new spending review meant that we had to decide how we extend it or not. And we thought, well, they told us they liked the program. That's the best we had. Let's scale it up. A big announcement was made, scale it up. 18 months later, the evaluation comes in. It doesn't work in any meaningful sense. In fact, it makes tensions in the communities bigger. Just think as a civil servant here, what the submission will be that you then have to write to your minister. You just announced 40 million increase of this program. We know now that it doesn't, but in fact, it probably will increase violence. What do you want to do? And then give a couple of options, okay? Basically, that's the problem with these big evaluation, the high-powered evaluations, they take too long. Just as it took too long for some job center evaluations that were done in the Department of Work and Pensions to actually live with the electoral cycle, it came too late to actually feed in, and the government then binned it anyway, and so on. But think of it. Solving it through contracting is not going to be enough. We need to rediscover the value of really thinking through quality monitoring and feedback loops. And I would say, for implementation and getting better social outcomes, we shouldn't just work only on our niches, me and the RCTs and the what works, and you on the impact bonds. But what is it there that we can learn from both of these approaches to do that middle bit better? How do we do that? How do we actually get to better ways of revaluing monitoring? And that's then the final things. What is it that we need to monitor? Well, I don't think we can just contract it all away. I mean, of course, you can contract the monitoring away, but I mean all the problems of implementation, you can't just contract away. There is something there. And to be honest, any investor in a social impact bond needs to keep an eye on the service delivery thing because they're working with their money and they have to do it anyway. We've just passed on the problem to someone else of actually knowing whether the service delivery is actually gambling their money away or actually making sure that they will get a return on their social impact bond. Why don't we bring it back as well on the public sector side? We need to start much better, monitor what's going on. Now, how do you monitor? Well, you could say I just monitor the outcomes. If you do vaccination rates, I think you can monitor the outcomes. If you want to monitor hospital visits, I think you can then do that. But if your outcome, your real social outcome is that small children reach adult life with a brain intact, for example, the long-term consequences of malnutrition, you can't wait for that. And you can't measure the brain at the age of 1 at a cost-effective way to actually have a prediction what it will mean at the age of 20. So you can't really have the real outcome you're interested in. So you have to think very carefully, what is your theory of change? What is your model? And actually, something we all have seemed to have forgotten in government with all our log frames, what you monitor is how you assumed this was going to work. You monitor your theory of change. That's the crucial bit. How you think this job center intervention is actually going to change anything and actually have a clear sense. And you may well monitor the inputs, sure, but we can all monitor our money put in and the pencils we bought with it. Some of the possible outcomes and the assumptions. And basically, I think that's an interesting area of work. If we want to push much better social outcomes, learn in it. And learn from what we learn from the work on social impact bonds, what it means for incentives on implementation and what do we need to do, what will upset the contractor, what will encourage the contractor or the contractee in doing things better. Learn from what works, how to actually get rigorous in making sure what is actually going on, but actually do it on the implementation phase. So that's my conclusion. You're all into this space of scientific methods. Social impact bonds, outcome-based contract is very cool. But, cool things are often a little bit on the margins in terms of the bigger picture. Do the cool things, but actually keep an eye on what you can learn from within that space on something where there's an awful lot more is going on. And let's make sure that we can provide better incentives, better understanding of how to actually do outcome-focused delivery. And I think monitoring is going to be a big part of it. Thank you very much.
So thank you so much, Stefan. We are moving into the coffee break, so can I ask you to take questions in the forum?
I'm very happy to do that. How do you do that? Go and start somewhere.
People will just queue for you. We can leave the conclusion up. Because the conclusion are telling us what is going to work, and we just have to implement it. So we have a coffee break for half an hour. We are back in this room for the next plenary. 15 minutes. Oh, that's short. So we are back here at 10:30. So quickly queue to ask questions to Stefan. And please post on Twitter insight you got from the session.
No,